So today's presentation really is focused on behavior change and more specifically how triggers, outside triggers, can impact our overall behavior change. I really enjoy this presentation and I hope you can take away some new thoughts and ideas when thinking of behavior change. This is a brief agenda of what we're going to review. So first we're going to dive into behavior change in general. Then we're going to define what triggers are. Then we'll dive into 15 belief triggers. So these are internal triggers that could potentially prevent you from successfully reaching a behavior change goal. Then we're going to discuss how our environment can impact our behavior change. Then we'll touch on learning how to identify our own triggers. Then we'll end on helpful tools for positive behavior change. So as I'm going through this presentation, I want you to think of a behavior change that you have done or you want to do and see how it applies through all these different methods that I discuss and teach. So achieving a meaningful and lasting change may be simple, simpler than we imagine, but simple is far from easy. How many of you could agree with this? Something could seem simple, but when you really try to actually act on it, it's not easy. So I think this is super common for behavior change too. It may seem simple, some of these changes that we want to make, but it's really not easy if we don't have the right plan in place. Maybe we aren't considering these outside triggers. So hopefully today I'll be able to give you some methods on how to make it a little easier, not just a simple term. So touching on behavior change, in all reality, behavior change is really hard to achieve. It's difficult to even admit that we need to change in the first place. That's typically the biggest barrier to start making that behavior change. And we really don't ever tend to acknowledge how impactful the environment and outside factors can be on behavior change. We may have all the self-control or we may think that we have all the self-control in the world, but in reality, when we're faced with these outside sources, it could prevent us from successfully reaching our behavior change goals. And I think that second bullet is the most important. No one can make us change unless we truly want to. You may have friends and families telling you that you need to be more physically active and you need to do this, you need to do that, and you can say, yeah, I get that, but really if you don't want to do it yourself, it's not going to be successful at the end of the day. You may start to make that behavior change, but for a long-lasting change, that motivation and drive has to come from within because you're going to be your own cheerleader, and self-discipline has to come from within and not just outside factors. When we prolong negative behavior change, we are leading a changeless life in the most hazardous manner. We are willfully choosing to be miserable and make others miserable too. Miserable is kind of a tough word when I'm saying that. It may seem a little extreme, but it could be making others around you miserable in the sense that they know that you're practicing unhealthy behaviors. Maybe you are miserable subconsciously and you're not aware that these behaviors are impacting your mental well-being. Maybe they're impacting your physical well-being. So miserable may seem like a tough term, but in all reality, having negative lifestyle choices and not making positive behavior changes could impact your overall well-being. And I apologize, there are some formatting issues because it's actually a different font on the original presentation on my version, so it didn't transfer, so there's going to be a few formatting issues throughout this. But why do we struggle to become the person that we actually want to be, and why do we struggle to make these behavior changes? The answer is triggers. Does anybody understand what I mean when I say triggers? You want to give a shot? I know it's still pretty early, so if you don't want to participate, that's fine, I understand. But triggers are really, by definition, any stimulus that reshapes our thoughts and actions. So really what it means is any outside factor or internal thought that cause an initial response. So typically triggers can be negative. For example, if you're driving in traffic and somebody cuts you off, your kind of initial reaction is to just get frustrated with that person, get angry. And I'll use that example quite a bit. Yeah, that could be a common one. I'll use that example quite a bit throughout this presentation, but that car cutting you off is going to be that trigger. And really what we're going to touch on today is how you can manage your response, because you cannot control that car cutting you off, but ultimately you can control your reaction. So that's how we're going to address today. And when it comes to behavior change, you're always going to be facing triggers. It may result in you wanting to give into temptation to not reach your behavior change goal. So really understanding those triggers is important in order for successful behavior change. So how do we make triggers work for us, avoid the bad ones, and repeat the good ones? This is where simple comes in, but it's far from easy. But be mindful. Learn how to be a little bit more mindful. Think of the potential consequences of your initial reaction. Bring yourself to the present moment and just try to think for one brief moment with a breath how your reaction could impact the rest of your day even, or impact that initial response. What's going to be the cause and effect of that response really? So be a little more mindful. That's the number one way that you can work with these outside triggers in your favor. So 15 belief triggers. So these aren't necessarily outside triggers. These things that I'm about, oh, sorry, I may have just broke that. Anyway, sorry. So these 15 belief triggers are actually internal thought processes that could prevent you from making a behavior change in the first place, or prevent you from reaching a successful behavior change goal. So going back to your own behavior change thought that I had you think of at the beginning, I want you to consider these things I'm going to review and see if you've ever thought any of these or if you've ever said it, and you'll see what I'm saying in just a moment. But it's likely that we've all thought the majority of these, if not all of them. So if I understand, I will do. So what this means is that we may all understand that the general guideline for physical activity is 20 to 30 minutes a day, and we understand that, right? But just because we understand it doesn't mean that we're successfully going to actually do it. Maybe we don't know how to exercise effectively. Maybe we don't know of an exercise that's going to be fun for us. Maybe we don't even know where to start, where to go. So you may have a general understanding of that you want to do this behavior change, but you don't necessarily know how to do it and have a plan. I'll have willpower and won't give in to temptation. I think this is a pretty common one when we're first starting our behavior change goals, because we're really motivated and excited and we think we're invincible and we're not going to give in to temptation. But ultimately this could result in overconfidence and set you up for failure. At least I'm better than so-and-so. So if your goal is to eliminate dessert out of your diet, but then you cave and you have one piece of cake, but then you see Joe over there having 2 pieces of cake, you're saying, well, at least I'm better than Joe because he's eating 2 pieces of cake, I'm only eating 1. You're justifying your behavior, and it's just creating an excuse. And really, you need to own your behavior change choices and follow through with them. Don't try to put an excuse or blame on somebody else and make that distraction. Own up to your behavior changes and follow through with them. Today is a special day. I think this is a common one as well. Today is my kid's birthday, so I am going to eat that piece of cake. Or it's a Friday night, I've had a rough week, and I just want to sit on the couch and eat ice cream. I think this is a pretty common one. We typically can find some type of excuse to give into that temptation and avoid fulfilling our behavior changes. It's very important to stay consistent with your goals in order for them to be successful. I shouldn't need help and structure. So I think we have a lot of enthusiasm at the beginning of our behavior changes, and we think that we know everything and we don't need that support. But at the end of the day, that support system is going to help promote these behavior changes and make it easier for you. So discuss your behavior change goals with your spouse, your family members, your friends, whoever you want, and then they can help provide input and even some structure. Maybe they do see you reaching for that piece of cake, and maybe they could just politely remind you of your goals. Not shame you, of course, but just support you. I won't get tired of my enthusiasm won't fade. So this is similar to the willpower one. We're really excited at the beginning, but ultimately after week 1, maybe week 2, we kind of start getting a little worn out, and it's not as exciting as it was at the beginning. So trying to be realistic about that when you're planning your goals. How are you going to tackle that when it comes? When your enthusiasm does start to fade, what are you going to do? What plan are you going to put in place to get back up and get motivated again? I have all the time in the world, so this is really more so referring to starting your behavior change. I think a lot of people look forward to Mondays to start new goals. And maybe it happens and then you fall off and then you go, oh, I'll start next Monday. And then that Monday comes, oh, I'll push it off till next Monday. So really, if you're wanting to make a behavior change, set a goal in place and stick with it and don't procrastinate, because the longer you procrastinate, the longer your behavior change is actually going to happen. I won't get distracted and nothing unexpected will occur. So this triggers unrealistic expectations. So you, like I mentioned at the beginning, may have all the willpower in the world and you have an internal plan of what you're going to do and the best way to enact this behavior change, but you have no control of the environment and you do have to be realistic about unexpected situations. What situations are going to happen for you to give into temptation? Consider those and consider those different distractions and how you could overcome them when the time comes. An epiphany will suddenly change my life. Maybe you're waiting for something to happen where you wake up one day and you're going to just say, oh, I need to quit smoking and I'm good and I'm done and I'm never going to have to worry about it again. That's magical thinking and it's likely not going to happen. With that, you need a plan in place and you just need to be realistic. It's likely that an epiphany is not going to happen and it's going to take some self-discipline and truly just some self-assessment and decide whether or not you truly need to make that change and even admit it. My change will be permanent and I will never have to worry again. I think a good example of this is somebody who deals with alcoholism and they go to AA. I know many people who have been sober for years and it's not a permanent thing in their mind. I know that AA teaches you that you have to live every day, day by day, and just because you've been sober for 15 years doesn't mean that you're going to be sober for the rest of your life. Change is not permanent, and you are always going to have to practice and make the effort to keep that behavior change in place. So just be realistic that it's not permanent, even though you cut out soda for 2 weeks straight and you think that you'll never want to drink it ever again. My elimination of old problems will not bring on new problems. I think a good example of this would be winning the lottery. I think we all tend to think money could solve all of our problems, but it's likely more problems will occur. So just keep that in mind as well of the different challenges that this new behavior change could make. I mean, maybe too, if it's a negative behavior change and maybe you're surrounding yourself around people that are practicing in this negative behavior change and you're really wanting to get away from it, then maybe you're going to have to distance yourself from those people and maybe that could cause some drama, maybe that could hurt some feelings. So you just have to consider kind of the ripple effect of what's going to happen when you eliminate these problems or changes. Or habits, sorry. My efforts will be fairly rewarded. So this could trigger resentment, and the reason why is because, like I mentioned, we are going to be our best cheerleader internally. We are going to be the ones recognizing if we didn't drink that soda. Your spouse may not recognize that you're wanting to give into this temptation and you completely avoid it. And so if they don't recognize it the way that you're recognizing it, you may end up being resentful because they may not be giving you the support that you think you need or that you're looking for. So just be aware and realistic of how others are going to respond and how that's going to make you feel and how you'll respond to their responses. This next one's similar to that. No one's paying attention to me. No one's noticing that I haven't eaten cake for a month and a half. Why isn't anybody, like everybody was paying attention to me at the beginning. They were so proud of me, but now nobody's paying attention to me. Because you were getting all that attention at the beginning and then not so much anymore, this could result in isolation, which ultimately could result in you falling back in those negative behaviors because those are kind of your crutch and that's your comfort zone. So just be aware of the reality and what other people's responses are going to be, and that their enthusiasm can fade as well. If I change, I'm unauthentic, you may think this one behavior is a part of your identity, but really this is just stubbornness. So just consider that. It's not part of your identity, it's just a habit. And I have the wisdom to assess my own behavior. I don't need anybody else to tell me how I need to change, what I need to do. This is all ultimately up to me, and I don't need anybody else's input. So just realize that you do need that support. And yeah. So after reading those, would any of you say that you thought those before potentially? Yeah, so if you recognize those belief triggers, those can help you not be set up for failure, not just with starting your goal, but maintaining your goal too. Just be realistic and consider those, all those different things as you're assessing your goal. Another thing that can set us up for failure is the environment. So as I mentioned earlier, we cannot control the environment. Most of us go through life unaware of how our environment shapes us, our behavior, but its impact is too significant to be ignored. So again, you cannot control the environment, you can only control how you respond to it. The environment is going to be ever changing, but it's up to you to decide how you're going to respond to those outside factors. And I think a perfect one that we could all relate to, that could actually be a fairly simple behavior change, is sleep. So we all have the motivation to sleep well. We all typically know how many hours of sleep we need to get at night to function the next day, be productive. But come the time we need to start going to bed, it's likely a lot of us procrastinate, and this is because of outside factors in the environment. We may need to watch our show on TV. We may scroll through Instagram for an hour before bed. Maybe we're checking work emails. All of those are just factors in the environment, but we are willingly choosing to participate in those different procrastinating behaviors. So rather than scrolling through social media for an hour before bed, maybe you are being a little bit more mindful and making a more relaxing setting, maybe taking a bath, maybe journaling, maybe just doing something to wind down rather than something that's going to stimulate your mind a little more and then make you fall asleep at 1 a.m. rather than 10:30. So just consider that if you struggle with it. Realize that you have the control over your environment in that situation. Like I mentioned, similar, our environment isn't static, it alters throughout our day. It's a moving target, easy to miss. A changing environment changes us. So I think sleep is easy because ultimately we really can control sleep in an easier way than, say, someone cutting us off. But again, just being a little bit more mindful and recognizing that nothing in our life is going to go as planned. And if we're just a little bit more realistic about that, we may be able to have a more positive response to these unexpected triggers or occurrences. Another thing that can set us up for failure that I want you to consider is ego depletion. So really what this term is basically the crash that we start getting at the end of the day. So at least for me, I know I'm way more productive in the mornings and can make wiser decisions, bring new ideas to my team in the morning than, say, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So our team meetings are actually every Thursday at 9 a.m. And I know that if we did them in the afternoon at even 2, we may not all see eye to eye the same. Maybe some of us wouldn't have as great of ideas. So consider that when you're thinking of your behavior change goals. So if, for example, your goal is to exercise 3 days a week, be realistic and think, by the end of the day, am I just done with the day and it's not going to result in me wanting to go to the gym? Maybe I'm going to want to just sit on the couch and hang out with my family and be tired and lazy, whatever it is. You just need to be honest with yourself and realize I may have more motivation in the morning, so therefore in order for me to achieve my goal realistically, I'm going to exercise 3 days a week in the morning because I know that I'm going to be more motivated then than I am at 5 p.m. And also, You're likely to make poorer decisions, so it's more likely that you'll give into temptation. And it was interesting, this one study in Israel with this parole officer, they assessed how often he or she was giving parole. And in the morning, 70% of the individuals were granted parole access, where at the end of the day, only 10% were granted parole. So that individual was just like, nope, I'm done with the day. There's been too much stimulus. I'm over it. No, you're not getting granted parole. So it's just interesting, and think of that when you're making wise decisions or important decisions for them to be more wise. So how can we create and control our environment instead of letting it create and control us? We need to learn how to identify our own triggers. So our own triggers with this behavior change. What is going to prevent us from making this behavior change successfully? So triggers aren't necessarily going to come in one form. They're not just going to be some physical factor of somebody cutting us off. So they can be direct or indirect. So a positive trigger, because triggers don't always have to be bad, would be if you were to see a baby, you instantly smile. Or if you see your parents or your kids, you automatically just get this overwhelming feeling. Just seeing them gives you joy. If you see an old photo, this is an example of an indirect one. Maybe you see a Facebook memory from 7 years ago, and it was with your college friend, and you haven't talked to them in years. And then you're kind of thinking about it over the next few days, and then a few days later, you ultimately text them. That would be an indirect trigger. Triggers can be internal or external, so they can come from within your own thoughts, or they can be external factors like the individual cutting you off in traffic. Triggers can be conscious or unconscious. I like that example of the weather could trigger our emotions. Sometimes gloomy days, people could feel a little more down. I've also noticed that come fall time, I'm thinking about college a lot more. I think it's just because I loved college up at Utah State. It was beautiful up there. And it was just a fun time of year getting back in the swing of things. And I've just noticed every year since college, every time around fall time, I'm thinking about college a lot more frequent. And that's an unconscious trigger. Fall is resulting in those happy memories. So that's another example of a good positive trigger. Triggers can be anticipated or unexpected. It would be nice if all of our triggers were anticipated, because then of course we would know how to handle them. But it's likely that the majority of these triggers are going to be unexpected, which could catch us off guard and result in negative responses. So again, that's going back to the whole mindfulness and being aware of these unexpected triggers and deciding how you're going to handle them for a more positive response. They can be encouraging and or discouraging. Of course, you want to avoid the discouraging ones. So to the example of the friends who are maybe engaging in those negative behaviors that you want to change, they're going to be discouraging triggers, and they're not going to support you. Their actions aren't going to support your overall goals. So just assess that. And they can also be productive or counterproductive. And so those last two bullet points are really the most important when it comes to behavior change, because you're going to want to assess your triggers and where they fall on this quadrant. So when you're thinking of your behavior change, think of all of your current practices or current lifestyle habits that kind of impact this behavior change and where they fall in this quadrant. Are they counterproductive or are they productive? Should I keep them or should I eliminate them? Are they going to encourage me or are they discouraging? So assess if we don't need it, but we want it. So of course this is going to be things that cause temptation or distractions. Completely try to eliminate those that we don't need and we don't want. So we don't want to feel isolated. And we also don't want to feel disrespected. So if there's something that's triggering those feelings, try to eliminate that completely, because that's going to ultimately prevent you from making positive behavior changes. We need it, but we don't want it. So this is something like rules and structure. We need it in order for us to reach our goals. We need to have check-ins, we need to have a structured plan in order for us to successfully reach it. Sometimes that gives us a little bit of discomfort, and that's why we don't necessarily want it. Rules and discomfort can make us not feel encouraged, but they are there for a reason, and they're there to help drive you. So keep those rules and structure in place, and then of course really focus on the wants and the needs. Focus on those that are encouraging you and recognizing you and praising you and giving you that positive reinforcement to help make those positive changes. Any questions so far? So with my examples, I've really walked through how triggers work, but this is just a visualization. So the trigger will happen, so somebody cuts you off, and then your initial behavior is to get frustrated about that individual, and then you're going to be dealing with consequences. Maybe that individual recognized that you were frustrated, so then he or she is getting back at you, and then maybe it's just this huge fight as you're driving home all the way, or maybe a consequence could be that that individual put you in a bad mood because they cut you off, and now you're taking it home to your family. Maybe you're grumpy when you get home. Maybe you're a little bit snappier with your kids, and maybe you're just not as joyful as you would have been if nobody cut you off. So it's important when I discuss the mindfulness term, the idea of it is to just interrupt that process. So that trigger is still going to happen. That individual is still going to cut you off, but be a little bit more aware and think, okay, why is this individual cutting me off right now? Maybe their wife is about to have a baby and maybe they're rushing to the hospital. Maybe they had a bad day and maybe they're just trying to get home to be with their family so it could be better. Maybe they truly didn't see me. So really kind of changing that mindset would be ideal, and then that results rather than in a consequence. You made a positive choice and it could impact your behavior a little more positively. I have a 2-year-old, so I feel like I'm constantly practicing this interrupting the process of my initial responses. The other day I walked outside to start the grill, and when I came back inside, my little girl had colored all over my walls, and I could have initially responded by ripping the pen out of her hand and just getting her away from the situation so she wouldn't do it anymore. But then I took a moment and thought, if that's how I react, she's going to think it's a funny game, and she's going to want to color over every single wall now. So instead, I just acknowledged that she did that, and I slowly grabbed the pen, and then I distracted her with the next thing in a very positive way, and she didn't even think anything of it. I don't even think she's recognized that that's a big no-no. So that's just an example of my current life right now. I'm dealing with those all day, every day. Just being a little more aware of how I want to respond to a 2-year-old when they're trying to figure out life. But it just reminds you that at the end of the day, you have control over how you want to react in your decision, and try to assess what the end result is going to be, whether it's a consequence or if it's just going to be an instance and then you've moved on and it's out of the way. Anybody else ever deal with 2-year-olds coloring on their walls? I thought, well, this happened finally. This is the first. I'm part of the club now. But that's an example of one of my little paper cuts. Some of the smallest moments that happen every day can cause our most outsized and unproductive responses. So again, just really notice, take a deep breath, and decide what the smarter choice is going to be. And honestly, I think you just feel better when you recognize that you made a more positive decision, and maybe 5 minutes down the road you're thinking back to that moment. You kind of give yourself a pat on the back, like, I'm glad I reacted that way, because you are kind of then replaying the negative consequence that could have happened if you reacted the initial way you wanted to, with the frustration or getting mad or whatever. So I think give yourself a pat on the back. There's no harm in that. Be your own cheerleader. So what can you do for a successful behavior change? Because the environment is ever changing and you are going to be dealt with these unexpected triggers all the time, try as much as you can to anticipate these scenarios that you're going to be in. So going back to the dessert example, if you, again, are cutting out dessert in your diet because you're just wanting to be a little healthier and not eat sugar, but you know that you have a kid's birthday party coming up on Saturday. You know there's going to be cake, there's going to be ice cream, there's going to be all these yummy treats. So then you need to consider, how am I going to avoid giving into temptation? The answer isn't to completely avoid the situation, because you do need to learn how to deal with these environmental triggers, and it's just not realistic for you to completely miss out on everything that offers temptations. So you need to decide, how am I going to avoid getting into this temptation? Maybe the answer is to go to the party with a full stomach. Maybe the answer is to bring a little thing of fruit, so that way when you do want that sweet quick response, you can just dive in and eat a couple strawberries, and maybe that will satisfy your craving. And then you're going to adjust, so then actually put it in place. And after you do it, you'll feel proud of yourself and successful, and you won't be beating yourself up because you didn't consider that there were going to be all these yummy, delicious cakes and goodies there. So just anticipate as much as you can. And even when you're thinking of your behavior change, maybe you don't have a specific upcoming event that you need to think of, but just lay out all the possibilities that could prevent you from making this successful behavior change. Physical activity, for example. Maybe you have to anticipate, what am I going to do when my alarm goes off at 5 a.m. and I really, really, really just want to sleep in? Do I need to sleep in my gym clothes? Do I need to have a different alarm that's a little more urgent? Get out of bed. Just try to think of all these different scenarios that you're going to ultimately have to face as much as you can, and develop a plan for a successful behavior change. And I've been talking to a lot of behavior changes that you either need to eliminate or create, but I think it's also important too to preserve and accept some of your current behavior changes. So of course you want to create positive elements in your life that are going to help enhance your future and your well-being, but there's also going to be things that you need to preserve. Take advantage of the fact that you do have these positive aspects in your life, and think of how you can continue to keep those habits healthy and well into the future. And when I say healthy and well, I mean of all aspects of wellness. Maybe you really enjoy your relationship with your kids. How are you going to keep that going? How are you going to preserve those habits moving forward? Of course, you want to try to eliminate the negative ones. So going back to that, encouraging, discouraging, supporting, now I can't remember the quadrant well, but going back to that quadrant, just go back and think, what do I completely need to eliminate out of my life? What's causing all this negative energy? What's just not even productive? That's what it is, productive and unproductive. And then just accept that there are going to be some negative aspects in our life. We're not going to be perfect. There are some things that we just can't change. So just learn to accept it and see if there is anything that you can do to just even enhance it a little bit and have a little bit more of a positive perspective if it's a negative one. So this, I do have a handout up here if you'd like to take it away. This little wheel of change is on there. And then just think of, like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be different behavior change goals, but just take a few moments and be mindful of your current lifestyle and think of the things that you actually value and preserve, rather than just eliminating dessert out of your diet. Maybe you actually like that you have a healthy, balanced diet that can have cake, that can have vegetables and fruit, and you know, and you don't necessarily have to eliminate cake. You can preserve the fact that you have balance in your diet. So just think of different lifestyle factors and see where it falls on this little change. And this is, I think, great, not even just with behavior changes, but if you are wanting to be a little bit more mindful of just kind of your everyday. I think it's common that we go through the motions, and at the end of the day, we don't even really think about what happened in the day. It's like we're just here at work and we're doing whatever, and then we go home, we eat dinner, and we go to bed, and we wake up and we do it all over again. And these daily questions, I think, engage our thought process to really assess how present we were and if we did our best. So I'm actually going to skip over and go back to that. So what I mean by engaging questions, rather than just a yes or no question, so for example, because I have my 2-year-old, I'm really focused on wanting to just make sure I'm a good mom, because being a mom is hard, being a parent is extremely hard. So rather than just saying like, was I there for my daughter today? Like, did I do a good job? Rather than just saying, yeah, or no, maybe not, you can dive into different questions. So, did I do my best to give my daughter attention today? Did I do my best to play with her? Did I do my best to listen to her? Did I do my best to discipline her when she needed to be disciplined? Rather than just asking these yes or no questions, if you ask these engaging questions and rank on a scale of 1 to 10, it gives you a little bit more insight on how you actually are. And then maybe you're looking at it and you're going, oh, I really only rank myself as a 3 when I really want to strive to be a 7 or above. How am I going to get to the 7 or above? So I think this is important with behavior change, of course. When you're making those behavior changes, break down these little minor goals. But also just, I encourage you to practice it with your everyday life. I think it's awesome. I think it's an awesome approach. And that way you can even go back and see how you've progressed. And of course, we're not perfect. Some days will be better than others. But maybe you could even too, along with this ranking, kind of journal as to why you rank yourself as a 7. And then on a day where you rank yourself as a 3, maybe go back to that 7 day and go, why, what's different here? And just assess. So, few benefits with this. It reinforces our commitment, and it shrinks our goals into manageable increments. I think we have a lot of willpower and motivation at the beginning, and we have this big overarching goal, but we're not necessarily breaking it down the way we need to. So consider all these outside factors and triggers of things that you know are going to be challenging, and then bring those into your daily engaging questions. So on this flyer up here too, I do have some examples of those engaging questions. Does anybody else like that as much as me? I know it's been helpful for me at least. So some benefits with it. If we do it, we'll get better. We get better and faster if it's obviously physical. Eventually we become our own coach. So it's going to help that intrinsic motivation. If you actually see it, you may not need all these outside forces. You can ultimately kind of hone in and decide how you are wanting to approach these engaging questions to get to the scale you want to be. So I encourage you, again, even if you're not trying to make a behavior change right now, just practice this, do it a couple times a week, and just see if you like it. It's just a fun little activity to do. And it may be hard, too. Being truthful with yourself, if you know that you are wanting to be, in my example, a more present parent, and I think that I did my best to put down my phone today, and then I'm really thinking about it, and I'm like, honestly, I may have to rank myself at a 2 today. That's hard, but it's the truth, and then that's what's going to encourage me to make better decisions the next day. And if you are doing a more difficult behavior change, such as quitting tobacco, ask yourself these hourly questions. They don't necessarily have to be a daily basis. They can be smaller hourly questions. A good one with this too, if you are wanting to eliminate your sweet tooth and you know that around 1 o'clock every day you're wanting that little Snickers piece, maybe every hour you're going to say, did I do my best to not walk by the candy machine, or did I do my best to not walk by Carol's office, who I know always has Snickers there for me. Just check in hourly with yourself and see how you're doing. And the simpler the structure, the more we'll stick with it. So if you notice in these engaging questions, if it has a 2-part to it, make them 2 separate questions. The more simple, the more direct it will be, and it will be easier for you to actually rank it. So the last portion of this is to just If you are going to make a behavior change, think of this acronym, AWOT. So, am I willing at this time to make the investment required to make a positive difference on this topic? So, breaking that down, so am I willing? This means that we are taking responsibility. It's us that are making the behavior change. It's not because your friend says you need to do it. It's not because your spouse says you need to do it. It's because the motivation is coming from within, and it implies that we are ready to take this responsibility and tackle it on our own. At this time reminds us that we're operating right now. So of course at this time that means you can set a goal, but that doesn't mean the procrastinating to every Monday. It means that you are actually committing to this goal here and now. To make the investment required. So this means truly, am I ready to make a full-blown lifestyle change? Am I ready to not potentially hang out with that group of friends that is encouraging these negative behaviors? Am I ready to invest in a plan and try to identify all my triggers for when I come face to face with these temptations? Am I really ready to invest my whole self into this behavior change and positive lifestyles to make a positive difference? So this reminds us that we can choose to make the better us and make these positive changes. And then on this topic, so focus, even if you have a few different goals, focus on one topic at a time and focus on one goal. I think it's common for us to get excited, and I think New Year's resolutions are a perfect example of this. We may want to do 20 different things for the new year, but then they all dwindle by week 3 because there were too many goals on our plate. So really just try to focus on one goal and one topic at a time in order for a successful behavior change. We do not get better without structure. Adding structure to our day is how we seize control of our unruly environment. So again, even if you have to make a plan every single day to make sure that you're doing a behavior change or doing those hourly questions, do whatever it takes and just really be mindful and realistic about how you're going to successfully change. So as a recap, it can definitely be difficult to change our behavior, but the behavior needs to come from within in order for us to have successful behavior change. The environment is going to constantly be throwing you triggers, and you need to determine how you're going to respond to those triggers for them to support your changes. Learn how to be a little more mindful of your environment and stop in that moment and decide if you're going to result in a consequence or if it's just going to be a positive choice when you are dealt with that trigger. And then if you are wanting a behavior change, anticipate as much as you can and avoid and then adjust. So that's the forecasting the environment. Decide on the wheel of change which behaviors you want to keep and which ones you want to eliminate and preserve. Give yourself a pat on the back for the ones that you want to preserve, and don't take those for granted. I think it's okay to be a cheerleader for those as well and say good job. I don't think we give ourselves enough credit sometimes. I think it can feel a little uncomfortable, but go ahead and just highlight your positive behaviors. Then, of course, do the daily, hourly questions, hourly if needed. And then if you are going to make a behavior change, think of that AWOT acronym and decide if right now is truly the time you're going to make the investment and commitment to making this behavior change. No matter how extreme circumstances, when it comes to our behavior, we always have a choice. So just keep that in mind. It's easy for us to point and blame everything else that we see, anybody, maybe anything in our environment, but just remember it is ultimately going to be our choice. Oops. Are there any questions? Okay, well I have some handouts up here if you're interested, and thank you for coming today.